So you're looking into 9mm ARs and you're not quite sure where to start. Well, understanding all the options available from various forum posts, articles, YouTube videos can be really intimidating and would take anybody days to understand it all. Well, don't worry, because my name is CJ with AT3 Tactical and I did all the work so you don't have to, ruffling through all of the information I could find on the internet, as well as consulting our expert team here at AT3 to build the ultimate AR9 guide. In this first episode, we'll explore why you should consider 9mm ARs as your next build and delve into the unique parts that set it apart from AR-15s. By the end of this series, we're going to end up with a fully built out AR9 of our own, and you'll also be equipped with the knowledge and confidence to enter the world of AR9s. So before we even get started, let's get our terms straight real quick. PCC, or pistol caliber carbine, is an all-encompassing term that you're going to run into a lot, and it's used to describe any type of rifle that shoots a caliber of ammunition that was originally meant to be shot out of a handgun. Now, the term 9mm AR is a term used to describe firearms that use components consisting of either converted AR-15 parts or dedicated AR-9 parts. Lastly, AR-9 is a specific term that refers to using an AR-style lower receiver that are designed to be used only with 9mm ammo and magazines. Now that we know what the different terms are and what they actually mean, why should anyone even consider 9mm ARs at all? Well, I think all of us have seen some sort of 9mm PCC in movies or somewhere in the history books. They have been around for a long time, and now they're accessible enough for us to build and have some fun with today. The thing to keep in mind is 9mm ARs are different tools designed for different jobs. Having a dedicated firearm that is purpose-built for certain missions is crucial if you're going to be a well-rounded shooter. The next factor to consider is maneuverability. If you build it right, a 9mm AR can be compact, making it great for grab-and-go situations like home defense. If you go the suppressed route too, something like this can be really quiet. So if you're anything like me and you already own a handgun, then the advantage of this platform is it uses the same type of ammunition as most of your trusty sidearms. 9mm is also a super common ammo type. It's going to be around half the price of traditional rounds you'd shoot out of an AR-15 like 223 or 300 Blackout. When considering ammunition choices, it's important to bear in mind that 9mm rounds are less penetrating compared to 223 rounds. Most 223 rounds are going to be around 50% higher velocity than standard 9mm rounds. The higher muzzle velocity of the 223 Remington round increases its penetrating power, leading to potential over-penetration. Another advantage of 9mm ARs is they're going to be more controllable than a handgun. You're going to be able to get 3 points of contact on a PCC rather than just 2 on a handgun. Extra points of contact are going to be more helpful when controlling recoil, and knowing where your bullets are flying and controlling them safely is crucial. To better understand the 9mm AR platform, let's get into a little bit of the history. The original AR-9 was designed by Colt in the 1980s and started out as a converted AR-15 with a conversion block that could fit Colt mags at first, but later a dedicated lower receiver was made for Colt-style magazines exclusively. Nowadays, shooters have the options of picking between Colt, Glock, or even other brands like SIG, depending on if they have the wrong opinion or not. There's also options ranging from straight blowback designs or the next generation of blowback tech called radial delayed or roller delayed blowback, which supposedly helps reduce recoil. Manufacturers have gone further and further with bringing AR-9s to the market, and while they still aren't as readily available as standard AR-15 parts and kits, they are a growing market for us 9mm shooters. So now that we know why AR-9s exist in the first place, let's talk about what parts are the same and what parts are different. So the parts that are going to be the same are going to be things like your standard lower parts kit, your pistol grip, things like charging handles, the handguard, and also the other accessories and toys that we like lights, lasers, optics, grips, all that type of stuff. We have a bunch of videos covering all of those topics individually, so go ahead and check out the links in the description below. But for our purposes here, let's go ahead and look at the parts that are actually different on an AR9. First and foremost, let's get into the magazine discussion, and this topic is going to generate a lot of disagreement. The question is, do you go with either the OG Colt mags or do you go with the newer Glock mags? Colt mags are durable, but less available, while Glock mags are more common and interchangeable with things like Glock handguns. For us, because of the availability and the fact that I'm a Glock fanboy, I'm gonna go with Glock mags for our build in this series. There's also other lower options that accept SIG mags and conversion mags called endo mags that convert normal P mags into 9mm mags, but we'll save that conversation for our episode all about mags. The upper and lower receiver are going to be a little bit different on a 9mm AR for a couple of reasons. Number one is something called last round bolt hold open. Last round bolt hold open is when you fire your last shot, the little tab on the magazine follower pushes up on the bolt catch on your lower, locking the bolt open, indicating that there is an empty mag and you need to change it out. This is a standard function of your AR-15 and something most shooters are used to. If you want the same function of a last round bolt hold open, you need to select either an upper or a lower receiver that offers that functionality. If last round bolt hold open is a priority for you, then you should probably get a matching receiver set that will help ensure you don't run into any issues. The second reason to get a dedicated AR9 receiver set is fit and finish, which ensures reliability and overall shooting experience. Something that is really going to contribute to that reliability though is choosing the right barrel, so let's get into that next. And just by comparing a 9mm barrel to a 5.56 barrel, we can see that this thing is a bit of a different animal. We can see that there are no locking lugs or feed ramps on a 9mm barrel like there are on the 5.56 barrel. This is because 9mm operate mostly off of something called direct blowback, meaning the force of the round being shot out the barrel is what forces the bolt back, making contact with the buffer and forwards to cycle a new round into battery. This process eliminates the need for a gas block or gas tube, which could be advantageous to you if you don't like messing around with things related to the gas system. There are other systems of blowback out there, such as CMMG with their radial delay system or Maxim with roller delay options meant to reduce recoil. All of these have their ups and downs, but you're going to have more options if you go with the standard blowback system. But you will get better perceived recoil management if you go with some of those other systems. Of course, there are some drawbacks to all of these systems too, but we're going to get more in depth into those drawbacks when we get into our barrel episode. Along with the barrel, that little thing that threads on to the front of the barrel called the muzzle device is going to be unique to 9mm as well. The reason for that is a 9mm bullet is going to be bigger than a 5.56, so pay attention and look for things on websites like ours that indicate the muzzle device you want works with 9mm. Just because any muzzle device can thread on to the front of a 9mm barrel doesn't mean that it's going to be compatible. Something else you're going to want to pay close attention to as well is making sure you're getting the right kind of BCG, so let's look at that. One of the biggest differences between a standard AR-15 and a 9mm AR is going to be the BCG. So when you're shopping for a BCG, make sure you're getting one designed specifically for 9mm and that it's compatible with either Glock or Colt style mags, depending on which style mags you're going with. Most bolts are going to have fewer parts than a standard 223 BCG and may also include interchangeable weights to help tune the recoil in just the right way, along with the interchangeable weights of the buffer system. But why do you need that extra weight? Well, one thing to remember is that the faster burning powder causes a higher cyclic rate, basically the speed in which an AR can fire another round. Due to this faster burning powder and faster cyclic rate, the bolt needs to be slowed down, meaning it needs to have extra weight. At the same time, most AR9 barrels don't have precise feed ramps, so the only thing that's helping the round into the chamber and keeping it there is the collective weight of the bolt, buffer, and energy of your buffer spring. Now that we have all the differences in parts down, there are going to be things you want to consider that are going to be based on your budget, options, and preferences, and that's going to lead you to fall into 3 different groups. The first one of those groups is converting. To make this simple, if you're someone who already has an AR-15, consider converting it over to a PCC. And if you're someone who doesn't want to worry about compatibility or reliability and doesn't want to do a lot of homework into building your own AR-9, then consider buying one off the shelf. And if you're someone who wants to control every aspect of your new range plinker, then come along with us in this series because we're going to show you how to build one just like this from scratch. Every project worth doing starts with the right foundation, and picking the right foundation with the correct PCC upper and lower starts right here. When I first started shopping around for AR9 receiver sets, I was confused at first, but in this video, we're going to help you figure out the right AR9 receiver set for your next PCC build by breaking down the differences, talking through the different options, and even picking out a set for our own custom build while giving you everything you need to know before you pick a receiver set out for yourself. What's up everybody, my name is CJ with AT3 Tactical. So first of all, the lower receiver is the part that houses all the controls you interact with, like the trigger, the safety, magazine release, and bolt catch. It's also where the buffer tube, stock or brace, and pistol grip attach. The lower receiver is the serialized firearm itself. It's the part that just can't be shipped right to your door. The lower will require you to fill out a good old 4473 from a Federal Firearms Licensed Dealer, or FFL, to transfer right to you. Standard AR-15 lowers share a lot in common with their AR-9 counterparts, but there are some huge differences. The first of those differences starts with the magazine you want to use in your AR build. Like we said in the first episode, you can pick between a few different styles of magazines. There are others out there, but the most common are going to be Glock or Colt. Each type of magazine is going to have different design characteristics, and therefore, some of the parts and pieces you select in the rest of your build are going to be different. The reason your magazine decision is so important is because it sets the foundation for all your other decisions. One suggestion when picking a lower is to look at the magazines you already have on hand. If you have a bunch of Glock magazines, you should probably go with Glock, whereas if you EDC a SIG or something else, you can probably find a lower that accepts those magazines as well. For our build, because Glock magazines are way more common, budget-friendly, and it's easy to get extensions and replacement parts for Glock mags, we're going to go with Glock magazine lower for our PCC build. Having parts that are meant to work and fit together is going to make a much better running and feeling gun. It is also a plus to have your lower tailor-made to fit your magazines, so you can have a lower that is going to have a flared magwell, for example, to help with those faster reloads, just because you have extra room in the magwell area. Speaking of the magazine, when it comes to the magazine release, you often see a paddle system on AR9s instead of the standard buttons on AR-15s. This is because most pistol magazines latch in the front of the mag using a lever design to interface with the front of the magazine rather than towards the back like standard AR mags use. You may not be used to seeing that weird claw when picking up the AR9 lower. On a AR-15, the ejector is a small plunger that pushes out the spent casing after firing, and it typically is part of the bolt carrier group. On most blowback 9mm ARs or even conversion kits, you will find there's a little claw that protrudes from the top of the lower receiver. The purpose of this is to yeet that spent casing out of the ejection port. But with some other systems like radio delays, you may find it very similar to how typical ARs work, with an ejector that is built right into the bolt. The ejector on the AR9 is probably the #1 thing you may need to tune a little in a new build to make sure rounds eject reliably, so pay attention to this little thing and try not to damage it. So before we talk about the lower options to pick from for our build, we need to talk about a super important consideration before picking out an AR9 lower. There are options like the Sullivan Arms AR-15 conversion block, which is a drop-in magwell block with a built-in ejector. This is a reliable and budget-friendly option if you already have invested in a quality AR-15 lower and you want to give 9mm a try. It's important to keep in mind that if you are going to convert your existing AR-15, you're going to have to build out a dedicated 9mm upper, which we're going to talk about later in this episode. In this series, we're going to build a dedicated AR-9 because when I look at how much an AR-15 lower with a conversion block is, I'm not actually saving a ton of money by doing that option. I also don't want to spend the 15 or so extra minutes before I hit the range to convert my AR-15, and I want to run with something that is going to be reliable because it's designed to work specifically with Glock mags and customized to what I want. For the option that we're going with in our build, it's machined from a solid piece of 775 T6 aluminum, and it's built like a tank. It's hard-coated, so corrosion won't be a problem, and it's got a flared magwell for those slick reloads that I'm always trying to get better at. It also has a threaded bolt catch pin and integrated trigger guard. The feature that I care about most, though, is that integrated last mount bolt hold open, which is a must-have for me. The Angstat Arms 0940 lower is clean, simple, and a solid choice for anyone looking to build an AR-9. If you're looking for more of a budget option, then something like the Air Precision EPC9 is a great value option. Something to keep in mind, however, is that this EPC9 is designed to work with the equivalent upper, So reliability may be a concern here if you venture off the beaten path and go with a different upper, so try to keep this one in the family if you can. Now let's move on to picking out an upper for our build. Think of the upper receiver as the top half of your rifle, where all the cycling function happens. I'm talking about the barrel, the bolt carrier, the charging handle. This is the part that gives your rifle its personality. You can swap uppers to change caliber, barrel length, or even just the look of your gun. On an AR9 upper, you're still going to have things like an ejection port for your brass to fly out of, and Picatinny rails for optics to be mounted to. Unlike its bigger brother though, the AR-15, the AR9 uppers are designed specifically for 9mm rounds. For example, the ejection port is smaller, which makes sense, right? Since the 9mm brass is physically shorter, the ejection window doesn't have to be as long as the typical AR-15 ejection port. Moving on to what we're going to go with in this build, and yeah, as you might have guessed, it's going to be the Handguards. It's a solid choice for anybody building a 9mm AR because it's designed to pair with the Handguards lower, and works with most standard AR-15 handguards. It's made from the same aluminum as the lower, making them super durable and light. Plus, it's versatile, working with both dedicated 9mm lowers or conversion blocks if I wanted to throw this 9mm upper on a different converted lower down the road. If you're looking for something that is the most reliable setup or things like last round bolt hold open, then you're probably best served by a matching receiver set like what we're doing in our build. Now that we have our upper and lower all picked out, we need to pick out the one piece that's arguably the most different in an AR9, the bolt carrier. But when we look at a standard AR9 bolt carrier and an AR-15 bolt carrier, we can see that there's a ton of differences. But what are those differences? To help you understand the differences, we're going to go over what 9mm direct blowback bolts are, how they differ from standard AR-15 bolt carriers, the reasons behind those differences, and we're going to wrap it up by going over some bolt options to pick out the best one for our PCC build as we continue in our ultimate AR9 Builder's Guide. Hey everyone, it's CJ with AT3 Tactical here, and if you're new to the AR squad, then you'll hear the term BCG or Bolt Carrier Group thrown around a lot with AR platforms. If you look at a typical AR-15 or even an AR-10, the BCG will be made up of two main pieces, the bolt carrier and the actual bolt. With 9mm, the most common system is what's called direct blowback, which will forego the rotating locking lugs system like your typical AR-15 uses. So actually, the 9mm direct blowback system bolt is going to be one piece integrated with the bolt and the actual carrier itself. If you really want to dive deep into the world of AR-15 bolts, then we have a great video for you right here. So what even is direct blowback anyway? Well, to help illustrate direct blowback, imagine squeezing the trigger and the round going off. The pressure pushes the bullet out of the barrel, but the pressure from the bullet going off also pushes back on the bolt. In a 9mm direct blowback system, that's all it takes to cycle the gun. No extra fancy parts for a gas system needed. Since the 9mm bolts don't have locking lugs that keep the bolt in place, the bolt needs to be heavy enough, and this recoil spring needs to be strong enough to slow things down just enough for the bullet to exit the barrel, pressures to drop to a safe level, extract the spent casing, eject it out, and then strip a new round out of the magazine, pushing it into the barrel's chamber. This key difference is crucial to understand when discussing 9mm bolts, as it influences all the other variations we'll encounter as we move on. With the differences of direct blowback in mind, let's quickly go through some of the biggest reasons 9mm bolts are different from AR-15 bolts. Starting out with the biggest difference, there are normally going to be three kinds of bolts depending on the magazines you go with: Colt, Glock, or hybrid bolts, also known as universal bolts. Be careful, because some Glock-only bolts can be a little bit finicky depending on the type of system that you have. In most cases, we suggest hybrid bolts. Hybrid 9mm bolts are going to be compatible with Glock and Colt magazines. One thing to keep in mind with most 9mm bolts is the firing pin will more than likely have a spring to keep it from bouncing around, which could ultimately damage the firing pin or lead to an accidental discharge. The next big difference is the ejector. On an AR-15, it's part of the bolt, but as we discussed in the last episode, in the AR-9 world, the ejector is usually a little claw that is built into the lower receiver. To accommodate this claw, the bolt has wider grooves on the bottom that are built into it, so the ejector can slide right through the bolt and get rid of the spent casing, much like your typical handgun. Depending on the manufacturer, there may or may not be ridges milled into the bolt for a forward assist. If you don't know what a forward assist is, that's okay. It's basically a little plunger that assists the bolt forward into battery. Most of the time though, most 9mm bolts aren't going to have those ridges. In the old days, the bottom side of the 9mm bolt was a straight design at the bottom, which meant if you used a mil-spec trigger, it would lead to more trigger slap, which basically means you could feel the hammer getting reset by the bolt when depressing the trigger. To mitigate this feeling, Colt used a specific 9mm trigger that had a smaller hammer so shooters would not feel this trigger slap. A lot of people sent their bolts to gunsmiths to have ramps cut into them so that they could use their favorite AR-15 style triggers. Colt later cut bolts with ramps built into them as a stock feature, and today we can use standard mil-spec style hammers instead of funky 9mm hammers or triggers. If you pick up a 9mm bolt, you'll notice how much heavier it is compared to a standard AR-15 BCG. The reason for this extra weight is usually the 2.2 ounces of extra weight that is built into the back, commonly held in by a pin in the back of the bolt. The extra weight on a 9mm bolt is important because the last thing that you want is for your bolt to start cycling while the bullet is still traveling down the barrel. If the bolt opens too quickly before the bullet leaves the barrel, there's a good chance the high pressure can cause real damage to yourself or, even worse, your PCC. Some people will even remove the weight to help with tuning, but we'll get into that a little bit later in this series. But be careful if you want to do this, because some of these weights are going to weigh differently and have different roll pins keeping them in place. So keep that in mind, because not all of these weights and pins are going to be standardized. And honestly, that can be said about 9mm bolts in general, because you're going to find all kinds of bolts out there, like some that have a two-piece design, like the Aero Precision EPC9, that have a shortened bolt with a large plug on the back to accommodate and change the weight in and out. These bolts are not compatible with most folding systems, and because of the pinhole, there's a thin area right next to the plug that some people have reported cracking, so I try to stay away from these bolts if I can. There are also bolts out there that have different bolt faces, internal extractors, special coatings for better recoil management, or even some that help enable last round bolt hold open, but honestly, all of these differences are going to be specific to the manufacturer. So when you're picking out your own 9mm bolt, spend some time and do some of your own homework to figure out what bolt is going to work well for you and what features you value. But let's move on and pick out a bolt for our own 9mm build. Before we do that, I gotta bring up two other options that you may want to look into. There are systems out there that are called roller delay, and other systems that use something called radial delay. Both of these options are similar to direct blowback. However, as the name says, they will delay the movement of the bolt after the bullet is fired. By delaying the movement and soaking up the energy, you can actually use lighter bolts than you would normally in a direct blowback system, thereby reducing recoil. So if you're looking to build the ultimate lightweight PCC or reduce recoil even further, you may want to look into these systems. If you want us to do a deep dive into roller or radial delay bolts, let us know in the comments, because there's a lot to talk about here. But for now, let's move on to picking out a bolt for our own build. The first bolt we're going to look at is a solid choice for almost any AR9 build. Our AT3 9mm bolt is priced right, backed by our lifetime warranty, of course, and it's compatible with captured buffers like Armaspec and JP buffers, but we're going to talk about those in later episodes. It's coated with black nitride, which means the bolt is durable, easy to clean, and the ramp design allows you to use almost any trigger that you want, like we talked about earlier. And since it's a hybrid bolt, you can use either Glock or other types of magazines, as long as you have the proper lower and upper receiver. It's a basic bolt, and it gets the job done reliably at a good price, and can't really ask for much else than that. For those seeking enhanced reliability in their AR9 build, the Faxon Firearms Black Nitride 9mm bolt is a good choice. Faxon has made some big improvements to key components like the extractor, carrier key, and firing pin, all in their second generation bolt. I did some of my own digging and found a ton of positive user reviews. It's clear to me that this bolt delivers consistent and reliable performance. So, if you're looking for a little bit of an upgrade over the AT3 bolt, then you may want to check this one out. All of that is to say, maybe don't buy into the hype of any company telling you this will make your gun run perfectly. At the end of the day, companies may claim to have some fancy tricks and design enhancements, but a lot of these bolts work basically the same way. So do some of your own homework and pick one out that works for you and, of course, your wallet. The bolt that I'm going to go with, though, is, no surprises, our AT3 9mm bolt. It's going to be just fine in the Angst upper and lower receiver that we picked out earlier, and we've had no complaints about reliability when it comes to this guy. Now that we have our bolt all picked out, it's time to pick out arguably the most important part of any gun, the barrel. Can you tell me what the best barrel for a PCC is? Well, what does best even mean anyway? Best weight, best length, best material? What about best ballistic performance? Well, all of these topics can be confusing, so we're going to talk about the basics of 9mm barrels while going through all these considerations and more to help you before you grab one off the shelf. And finally, we're going to go out to the range, do some testing to find out together which barrel is best for our custom PCC build. Before we go out and throw some lead down range, we need to talk a little bit about what makes a 9mm barrel in the first place. The big and obvious difference is going to be the chamber and the bore size of the barrel. The chamber for the 9mm barrel is going to be different to accommodate the wider diameter 9mm bullet compared to the traditional rounds you would fire from an AR-15. The bore size of the barrel and the chamber have to be different to accommodate the larger and girthier and stubbier bullets. In a typical AR barrel, you're going to find something called a barrel extension, whereas on a blowback 9mm barrel, it's going to be considered more of a feed cone. Since the bolt doesn't actually go into the barrel to lock up, what would normally be in the barrel extension is what is actually part of the barrel itself. I've talked a lot about direct blowback in other episodes, so we aren't going to get into that here, but the super quick version of it is that the pressure from the bullet being fired is what propels the bolt backward to begin the cycling process. No fancy gas system is required, so therefore, most of the time, no locking lugs or barrel extension. At the business end of the barrel, we have threads to accommodate a muzzle device. Most of the time, the thread size is going to be the standard 1/2x28, but pay attention when shopping for a muzzle device and make sure you're getting one designed specifically to use with 9mm bullets, and that has the right thread size for the barrel that you ultimately pick out. And when you are shopping for a 9mm barrel, you might see something listed in the specs called a twist rate. For other barrels, that twist rate is going to be something to consider if you want to engage in some long-range shooting. But for us, since we aren't going to be poking out past about 100 yards, the twist rate isn't going to sway our choice. Most commonly, you will find a 1 in 10 twist rate on a 9mm barrels, but if you find a barrel that you like and that fits your needs, don't let the twist rate sway your decision when it comes to 9mm. Okay, so knowing the different sections of the 9mm barrel is great, but when you start shopping around for a 9mm barrel, the options and features to consider can be overwhelming for some of us. I know it was for me anyway. So to make it simple, here's a quick breakdown. Options like material, ability to clean, and longevity can all be unique to the manufacturer and the company that you're going to be buying from. In the end, there are really 3 big things to keep in mind before picking out a 9mm barrel for yourself. Those features are going to be length, the weight of the barrel, and the reliability of feeding ammo. Let's go through each of these in detail just really quick. The first and biggest thing to consider when picking out any barrel is going to be the length. But why is barrel length so important? It comes down to mission priority and how you intend to use your PCC. Do you plan on using this as a compact, suppressed, short-barreled rifle for self-defense? Well then, you might want to consider getting something like an 8-inch barrel and the right paperwork to go with your new SBR, or just be like me and throw a pistol brace on it and call it good and keep those pesky 3-letter agencies out of your business. But maybe you just don't want to worry about walking the fine legal lines or pay the extra fees when having a short-barreled rifle. So maybe in that case, you want to get a full 16-inch length barrel then. It all comes down to what you plan on doing with your gun, so think it through, and that will help narrow down your options for barrels. Else to consider, and something else that's really important to think about when it comes to barrel lengths, is getting the best ballistic performance. I'm talking about things like muzzle velocity in particular. Think of throwing a football. When you throw the ball with a light, slow lob, it will drop, and its trajectory will look more like an arch. But if you hurl the ball as fast as you can with a tight spiral, it will have a trajectory that is closer to a straight line. The same principle with the football applies to bullets. The faster the bullet goes, the more distance it can cover before hitting the ground. Faster bullets are generally more reliable for long-range shooting because they can cover more ground quickly. Longer barrels typically equal faster muzzle velocity because the propellant gases have more time to fully burn and create maximum pressure behind the bullet as it travels down the barrel. Stick around because we're going to the range to figure out how different barrel lengths affects velocity a little bit later in this video. But before we do that, let's move on to the next consideration, which is the weight of the barrel. Again, it all comes down to mission priorities and what you plan on using your PCC for. Do you plan on using this gun exclusively as a range paper plinker? Then weight may not be as big of a concern here, but if you're planning on bringing this gun around in a backpack, or maybe you're one of my competition buddies and you want to make fast transitions from target to target, then this is when having a lightweight barrel can matter a lot. Reducing ounces at the end of the gun can make a huge change in how you manipulate your actual firearm. Once again, think about what you want to do with your gun and its intended purpose. That should help guide you to what is going to work best for you. If you want something a little bit lightweight though, there are some interesting barrel options out there for you. Some barrels, like the Odinworks Super Light barrels, have a 16-inch pin-and-welded aluminum shroud that covers a stubby 5 inches of rifling. They also look super clean. Odinworks designs it like this for two reasons: to make the barrel qualify as a full 16-inch rifle barrel, and to keep the weight as low as possible. So you might be thinking, CJ, what are you even talking about? Well, our good friends over at our favorite three-lettered agency count anything that is permanently attached to the barrel as part of the actual length. So, the benefit of these types of barrels is that you can rock a fully legal 16-inch barrel while maintaining a lightweight profile. Win-win. Ultimately, it's up to you, but make sure you're keeping up to date on all your current laws in your area that relate to barrel length, pistol braces, and things like that. So for me, since I want this gun to be a super tactical gun that is more for self-defense, I don't want something that's going to be super heavy, so I'm going to be factoring in weight as well as the next factor, which is feeding ammo consistently. So what ammo type do you plan on shooting? Hollow point? Full metal jacket? Well, if you plan on shooting mostly FMJs, then I've heard very little issues when it comes to reliability of feedings. But with hollow point rounds, just like in handguns, they can be a little bit more finicky. For example, some people have reported jamming or feeding issues when trying to feed self-defense catered hollow point ammo in 9mm PCCs. This is because the 9mm feed cone at the chamber of the 9mm barrel has remained essentially unchanged since the 1980s and was originally only intended for use with full metal jacket bullets. To counter some of these issues, some newer barrels today have enhanced feed cones like the Ballistic Advantage barrels, and some more unique barrels like those offered by TACCOM or Shooting Innovations have feed ramps built into the barrels similar to handgun barrels to help with reliable feeding. All of these options are in service to help feed the ammunition reliably into the barrel so you can pew-pew over and over again without having to worry about feeding failures. So now that we've talked about all the considerations when picking out a barrel, let's go ahead and test these barrels right here to figure out which one is going to give us the fastest muzzle velocity. I picked out 5 of these barrels straight from our warehouse to bring out to the range with us, so let's go right now. Okay, so we're out here at the range, so let's go through our testing criteria real quick before we get shooting. So we're gonna be using the same Blazer 9mm ammo. It's 115 grain of ammo. For the barrels that we're gonna test today, we're gonna be using an AT3 Tactical 16-inch barrel as well as an 11-inch barrel, and then the rest are gonna be Ballistic Advantage, an 8.3-inch, a 5.5, and a 4.5-inch barrel. The thing about these is they all have the same coating, they're made out of the same material, they all have the same 110 twist rate, so none of those factors are gonna be a part of this test here. So for the testing procedure here, we're gonna be using one gun. We're gonna be using a modified CMMG Banshee, and that's gonna be used throughout the test. So it's gonna be the same bolt, same trigger, same everything, so none of that is gonna be a factor. And we're gonna do 5 shots with each barrel, measuring it with our chronograph that we got set up, and then we're gonna be swapping the barrels out and logging all the data, and then we're gonna take that back to the shop with us to analyze that data and see what we find. All right, and we're back, and the results were a bit surprising, at least for me. So our test results found that the 16-inch barrel had about 1,400 feet per second of muzzle velocity. The 11-inch barrel had about 1,380 feet per second. The 8.3-inch barrel had an average of about 1,280 feet per second. The 5.5-inch ballistic advantage barrel had about 1,200 feet per second. And the 4.5-inch ballistic advantage barrel gave us around 1,140 feet per second. Typically, what you will find is the longer barrels will give more time for the powder to burn completely, meaning you will get higher velocities, especially when it comes to things like handguns. But the same is true with our barrels here. Now, with PCC barrels, there are a lot longer barrel options that weren't around when the 9mm cartridge was first designed. So, the question we want to try to answer is, if the barrel is too long, do you actually lose muzzle velocity? If we look at our test results, when using the same Blazer 115 grain ammo out of a 16-inch barrel, we get about 1,400 feet per second. But if you want something shorter, more compact, like a 5.5-inch barrel, for example, then you're going to lose as much as 200 feet per second, which is about a 15% difference, but you're trading that muzzle velocity for portability and weight savings. So after testing all these barrels, we found that the one that gives us the highest muzzle velocity is the AT3 16-inch barrel. So if you're looking to send that 9mm bullet as fast as you can downrange, then you probably want to go with something at about a 16-inch barrel length. However, since this is going to be more of a self-defense gun and I don't care as much about having the maximum velocity coming out of the barrel, I'm going to choose to sacrifice a little bit more of the velocity for other priorities. So for our build, I'm going to go with the Ballistic Advantage 8.3-inch barrel. I'm only losing about 2% of the velocity compared to the 16-inch barrel. The nice thing about the BA barrel is it comes with an enhanced feed cone, so I won't have to worry about feeding hollow point ammunition as much. Okay, we got the receiver set, we have the BCG and the barrel all figured out. Now we need to thread on a muzzle device or possibly even a silencer. So let's go into different types of muzzle devices that are available to us today. First up, we have flash hiders, and they're designed to help minimize flash, or what the tacticians call visible signatures, by using vents to divert and cool hot gases, preventing them from igniting and creating a really bright muzzle flash. The most common flash hider out there is what most people know as the A2 birdcage, but there's a lot of options out there. Traditionally, flash hiders will be one of the most cost-effective muzzle devices that you can find on the market. Now let's talk about compensators real quick. When you fire the gun, the muzzle typically rises a bit when fired. That rise is called, no surprises, muzzle rise. Now this is a muzzle brake. Instead of just diverting gases out, it creates a blast of gases that pushes backwards through the vents, therefore pushing the gun forward, counteracting the backwards movement after the gun fires and reducing felt recoil again. Finally, my favorite, silencers, also known as suppressors, use baffles and chambers to slow down and cool gases, reducing the sound they produce. Speaking of sound suppressing, one of the main use cases other than recoil control for 9mm muzzle devices is sound direction. For example, if you're into competition shooting, you may want the sound to go backward to return to the timer so that your shots can be captured and recorded accurately. In which case, you might want to go with something like a brake that throws most of the gas and sound backwards. On the other hand, if you want to push the sound forward so it's quieter for yourself, you might want to go with a linear comp like this, the KVP pistol caliber comp that will direct the vast majority of the sound downrange. One thing to consider when shopping for a muzzle device is you'll need to match the threads that your barrel comes with. So if your barrel has a 1/2x28 threads, you will need a muzzle device that is properly sized for 9mm, but also has the same threads on the barrel. There are two common sizes for threads on 9mm barrels, 1/2x28 and also 5/8x24, so keep your eyes open for those. Now, here is the dirty little secret about muzzle devices that we haven't talked about yet. A muzzle device doesn't actually do that much on 9mm ARs because there's actually very little gases coming out of the barrel for the muzzle device to interact with, especially when compared to a 5.56 round. Compensators are usually going to be your best bet for muzzle devices. Again, 9mm guns have very little gases for a compensator to work with, but comps that only have top ports and no side ports tend to be the best option to try to squeeze any notable performance at all, like this one from Strike Industries with their Mini King compensators, for example. Really, if you don't want to spend a ton of money, a good old-fashioned $10 A2 bird cage can work just fine for the vast majority of us 9mm shooters, because we aren't going to see any real change in felt recoil unless you're shooting some high-pressure ammo that you're cooking up yourself. At the end of the day though, a lot of these options are going to come down to how you want your gun to look. Maybe you're going for an old school theme to your gun, in which case an A2 bird cage will actually give your gun that classic look that you're going for. Or you might be more like me and you want the cool looks and aesthetics of a suppressor, but you don't want to dole out the extra cash for it, so you might want to go with something like a linear comp. So those are all mostly the considerations you have when looking for 9mm muzzle devices, but there's one huge topic that we didn't even cover yet, which is using suppressors on a 9mm AR. As many of us know, suppressors are more popular than ever, and why not? For those of us who have used cans, or those of us who have shot a gun with a silencer on it, you already know. But if you've never had the oh so joyful experience of firing a gun with a suppressor on it, you will instantaneously know and understand why they're so popular today. While they are so popular for their noise reduction factor, they do have a practical use case as well. The first of which is helping with recoil reduction, since the suppressor will add weight out the end of the barrel. Using a can will also slow down the gases exiting the barrel by reducing the fast and sharp pressure impulse. Between the extra weight and reduction of gas velocity, both of those will help reduce muzzle rise. But who am I kidding? Suppressors are just cool. One of the reasons 9mm is a great option to suppress is because many 9mm rounds are subsonic, meaning they don't break the sound barrier when fired. Breaking the sound barrier, or going supersonic, is what produces that loud crack, and that crack will keep traveling and producing noise as long as the bullet is going over the speed of sound. Subsonic 9mm rounds are pretty easy to acquire, since most of the heavier grain bullet options like the 135 or the 147 grain variants will be traveling slower than the speed of sound. This makes 9mm a great option for use with suppressors, especially if you go to indoor ranges a lot, or shoot on public land, or you have the unfortunate case that you need to use your weapon quickly without throwing on some ear protection first. Now, as it relates to other muzzle devices, if you're considering a suppressor, which, hint hint, you should, you might want to put thought into a QD or a quick detach system. For those of you who are new to the world of suppressors, the rundown of quick detach, or QD, gives you a fast and easy way to attach or detach your suppressor to your barrel. You might want a QD system so you can use it on multiple guns, or so you can quickly remove the suppressor from a muzzle device on your barrel and place it on a different gun if you're fortunate enough to own multiple guns. Before you give any thought into what QD system you want, you need to ask the obvious question. What suppressor do you have, and is it QD compatible, or what suppressor do you want? Let the answers to those questions guide your decision as to what muzzle device you buy. Because of the wide variety of suppressors and ways to mount them, you want to let the suppressor you want or have be the foundation of the muzzle device decision and go from there. There are tons of options for suppressor QD mounts, so we're not going to go in depth with them here, but a couple of examples of the most common attachment systems are the Dead Air Chemo 9mm flash hider and the Sons of Liberty Gunworks 9mm muzzle brake, or the triplet flash hider from Breek that uses the Breek lock system if you have the compatible adapter for your suppressor. If you want a full video on different QD options out there, let me know in the comments below, right below that like button. So for the muzzle device that we're going to use in our build, I'm going to go with the Breek Arms triplet flash hider. The reason I like the new Breek lock system is the hub is ultra light, coming in at 2.4 ounces, and since it sits out the end of the barrel, reducing that weight is a top priority for me. Also, the tapered mounting system gives the can a super secure lockup that I know won't fail. The triplet flash hider will work well as a normal 9mm flash hider for now, and within seconds, I can toss a can on whenever I need to. In the end, choosing a muzzle device should be a pretty quick decision, and if you end up hating your muzzle device, it usually only takes 5 minutes to swap it out for the cost of a couple of boxes of ammo. Something that you could spend a lot of money on, though, is the charging handle for your PCC. Okay, now by no means do you need a fancy-dancy charging handle, but it is something that you're going to interact with almost every time you go out with your gun, so you're going to want something that is comfortable and easy to operate. But before you think about which charging handle you select, you probably want to give some thought into what your gun is for. Do you intend this to be a backpack or truck gun? Well, then you probably want a sleek and compact charging handle that doesn't have wider wings, for example, making it harder to pack into a bag. On the other hand, do you intend this gun just to be your range gun for a little steel plinking? Well, maybe you want something that is comfortable, easy to grab onto, and cheap. So let's move on to picking one out for our own PCC build. Now, it would be pretty much impossible for me to talk through all of the charging handle options out there because you got things like color options, ambidextrous options, coating and material choices, some that have rubber or ridges cut into them for better grip, but you see what I'm saying? There are lots of styles, but let's talk through some of the few options that we have here, and hopefully that'll get you started on the right track. Let's start out simple, and our first choice is simple, reliable, and gets the job done while not breaking the bank. The AT3 Tactical GI charging handle may lack some of the bells and whistles of higher-end counterparts like ambidextrous operation, but it's a solid choice for those who prioritize affordability and simplicity. You've got 10 color choices including FDE and ODG, but also ones that are more interesting like red, pink, or blue to match whatever style and personality that you might have. If you're looking for an easy upgrade over the basic GI charging handle, then you can go with our most popular options like the Breek Warhammer, the Radian Raptor, or even the Armaspec Victory charging handles. Between these popular options, you'll probably find something that you like. Now, if you saw our last episode, we spent a lot of time talking about suppressors and how great they are when using them with 9mm ARs. So if you want to learn more about that, then go check out our last episode. But the one downside of suppressors is how gassy they can be because instead of hucking all that gas away from us, the shooters, a suppressor is going to contain and even throw some of that gas back at us, which can be really unpleasant. To help mitigate this effect, there are lots of accessories you can get to help with controlling and reducing the heavy metal latent gas that could end up spraying in your face and into your precious lungs when you're just trying to knock down some steel downrange. One of these gas mitigating accessories is called gas busting charging handles. Some great options for these kinds of charging handles include the Breek Sledgehammer that has ports that allow the gas to go through, or the pricey yet effective Raidworks Mach 15 that incorporates a rubber gasket to help the gas from getting thrown back out the upper receiver. And speaking of pricey, there's lots of charging handles out there that are going to be all about style and sexiness that are kind of trying to be the Bugatti of charging handles, like this one. The rubberized grip and sleek design make it stand out with either black or Gucci gold coating on the charging handle itself. The extended length is a nice touch for easy manipulation. However, the Tyrant CNC Next Gen ambidextrous charging handle's price tag is steep, so you're paying a premium for looks here if you're anything like me and that's what you care about most. But if you're trying to build something like what we have in mind for our project, such as a compact, tactical self-defense gun, you might want to avoid using charging handles with extended wings like this because, again, it makes it harder to fit into a bag and increases the likelihood of something catching on it. Considering the features, the price, and overall value, I'm going to go with the Breek Sledgehammer because I like the look, the ambidextrous grip, and the color choices are great. And I want to be a little bit more unique, so I'm going to go with the ODG color option. The thing I really care about though is that gas busting design to help mitigate the gas from the suppressor I plan on adding later. It works by the chamfered fluting down the length of the underside of the charging handle that helps break up the gas as it makes its way through the ports that direct the gas up and away from my right shoulder as I'm shooting. In the end, what's great about charging handles for AR9 builds is that it's the exact same thing as an AR-15 charging handle because the operation and how it interfaces with the bolt works exactly the same as an AR-15. So what that means for us is the whole world of AR-15 charging handles is available to us to pick from, so go ahead and do some shopping around and pick something that you like and fits within your budget. Do you ever think about how much you hold your handguard? In the world of ARs, as you throw lead downrange over and over and over again, your barrel gets hot from the friction of the bullet and all those hot gases from going down the barrel. So your handguard protects your hand from the heat while also giving you a place to attach all your stuff like grips, lights, tactical PEC lasers, and other gear. It's an essential part of any AR and shouldn't be overlooked. There are going to be two main types of handguards, drop-in and free float. A drop-in handguard usually comes in two pieces and will be attached to your barrel and secured in place with what is commonly known as a delta ring. It's a quick and easy and cost-effective handguard solution, but a bit more old school than the newer free float options. Drop-in handguards also contact the barrel, which could affect the barrel's harmonics. A free float handguard, on the other hand, doesn't touch the barrel and directly attaches to your AR's upper receiver and floats down the entire length of the barrel. This allows the barrel to vibrate freely and won't be affected by the handguard in any way, which can help improve accuracy. The vast majority of newer AR9 builds that I've seen out in the wild will be using free float handguards, so that's what we're going to focus on for the rest of this video. The majority of the time for 9mm ARs, you shouldn't have to worry about getting a handguard that is meant for 9mm. Similar to our last episode about charging handles, you can go check that one out, the world of handguards is available to us to pick from, but there are some interesting choices out there that are designed to work specifically for AR9s if you have some unique requirements, so let's talk about those. So let me ask, do you prioritize maneuverability with your PCC? In a self-defense situation, do you want to be lugging around a super heavy battle rifle that is going to slow you down or cause you to lose focus on your environment? Most free float handguards are going to be made out of aluminum, which is pretty light, but if weight savings is your #1 goal, there are carbon fiber options available. They might not be super cheap, but you can definitely save some weight at the end of your gun where every ounce counts. Take a look at the Faxon Streamline carbon fiber handguard, for example. The 10-inch option weighs in at just under 5 ounces, and it's by far one of the lightest options you can get right off the shelf. One huge benefit of 9mm ARs is you don't have to worry about a gas system because of the direct blowback design, similar to your trusty sidearms. The advantage of this is you can go with a smaller diameter handguard that is designed to work with PCCs since there is no gas system that the handguard needs to slide over. For some more special purpose options, you may want to take some time and go through Takom's handguard offerings since they do make purpose-built 9mm handguards that are super slim and lightweight. If I had to pick one out for my next PCC build, I would go with their Extreme Ultra Light handguards. So what is the length of the barrel that you want to put on your PCC? A lot of people choose to build really short AR9s so they can, again, be easily maneuvered. Most commonly, we see 9mm ARs with barrels under 10 inches or so. As with any rifle build, the length of your barrel is going to affect the choice of handguard, but you may have a hard time finding ultra short handguards that fit some of those super stubby barrels on the market, like the 3-inch 9mm barrels from CAC Industries. Keep the length of your barrel in mind when picking out the length of your handguard and get one that can actually fit your barrel properly and gives you the overall look and aesthetic that you're going for. Okay, have you ever been to the range with your range buddy that you know is much cooler than you? Or scrolling through all the pew-pews on Instagram and seeing what looks like integrated cans on ARs? If that is the look you're going for, then you're gonna want to either get a can that is a smaller diameter that fits inside the handguard or a suppressor-ready handguard. Suppressor-ready handguards will have larger diameter inside, which will allow you to recess almost any silencer down the length of the handguard. To do this, you'll need to know the combined length of your suppressor and your barrel, and just get a handguard that is 1 inch shorter than your barrel and can's length added together. And just remember, no matter what handguard you go with, you will want to make sure that the end of your barrel can stick out further than your handguard itself. Outside of these more specialized offerings though, there are other considerations when picking out a handguard that still apply, like how do you want to mount your accessories? Do you prefer a secure lockup of the old school military standard Picatinny rails, like this quad rail design for example, or do you want a more sleek and clean look? Well then, you might want to go for an M-LOK handguard like this AT3 Spear or the Stinger Hawk handguard, for example. The T-slots on the Picatinny rails are going to be more secure since they are machined directly onto your handguard or upper receiver. Even though M-LOK is the new military standard, many consider PIC rails as the gold standard for secure mounting, especially in harsh conditions. The downside of quad rails is they can just be kind of uncomfortable to hold. The T-slots can be sharp, and some people may not mind that, or you can add some rail covers to help smooth things out, but I'm betting that a lot of you are just going to go for our next option of M-LOK. Now, M-LOK was designed by Magpul as an alternative to pick rails in 2014 and also to compete with Keymod and ultimately outpaced Keymod. M-LOK keeps growing in popularity due to its sleek, smooth feeling in the hand compared to pick rails, the weight savings you get from going with lighter handguard that uses less material, and its rock-solid mounting system for accessories. M-LOK accessories are pretty simple too. You just insert the T-nuts through the M-LOK slots on the handguard, then tighten a screw until it's nice and tight, and you're done. Now, one downside of M-LOK systems is when mounting an accessory, the little T-nuts may need some love to sit just in the right place, but once you get the screws in tight, it shouldn't be going anywhere. There are those that say M-LOK is less secure than pick rails due to the possibility of the T-nut walking out on you over time if you don't screw it down tight enough. So make sure that you're tightening an accessory to the correct foot-pound spec the manufacturer recommends, and a little blue Loctite can go a long way. Deciding on how you want to mount your accessories is important, but not as important as how you want your handguard to look. In my confidently humble opinion, I would say that your handguard is what is going to contribute most to the look, feel, and personality of your gun. Some people don't like the cheese grater feel or militaristic aesthetic of quad rails, while others love the sleek feeling and sexy and unique design options that M-LOK handguards can offer. And all of that is to say nothing about the color options that you have. Some people even prefer to have a different color handguard to make it stand out from the rest of the receiver set, while others like it to blend in. All of these choices are up to you and your preferences, so take some time to figure out what you like best, or maybe do some more YouTubing or Googling, or better yet, go to a gun store to get your hands on what other companies have built and maybe create your own version of it. That's always an inspiring option. So for our build, considering the options we have and what we're going with in terms of looks, I'm going with the 7-inch Stinger Hawk handguard. The main reason I'm going with this is the looks, because I love the way how the top and bottom pick rails stick out, creating an integrated hand stop that is going to keep my hand in the same spot every time, and I do enjoy the smooth feeling and lightweight of such a compact gun where maneuverability and ability to get an accurate sight picture is paramount. Triggers are probably the most scrutinized part of any firearm. How's the break? The reset? How many pounds does it take to pull? 2-stage or single stage? Can a good trigger really make you a better shooter? Are there compatibility concerns, or can I use any old AR-15 trigger? By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what trigger you should use in your AR-9, so let's get into the basics of triggers in episode 8 of our ultimate AR-9 build guide. First of all, we need to clear up a common misconception. PCCs are not just ARs. While PCCs in the AR platform are really popular, they're not the only option. PCCs, or pistol caliber carbines, encompass a wide range of firearms chambered in pistol calibers, so what we're covering here are triggers that are designed for the AR platform, specifically for AR-9s. Alright, let's start out by breaking down the key elements you need to consider when choosing the right trigger for your AR-9. If you want a deep dive on AR-15 triggers and how they work and all the components, then we got a great video for you right here or linked down below, but let's do a quick crash course on triggers here to understand what elements to look for when shopping for a trigger. The first element, and probably the most common way triggers are shopped, is pull weight. This is the amount of force required to press the trigger and have it break or release the hammer. There's a wide range of pull weights out there, the most common being around 3 to 4 pounds, and some triggers offer adjustable options so you can dial in the weight that suits your preferences and shooting style. Like the Ballistic Engineering Accurized adjustable trigger, just as an example. So why does pull weight even matter? A heavier pull weight can help you be more deliberate with your shots, but the downside of heavy trigger is it does take more force to fire the weapon, increasing the chance of something moving as you try to pull the trigger. While a lighter pull weight can help improve accuracy, they do require more discipline when it comes to firearm safety. But all honesty, it's about finding the sweet spot that suits your style, so don't be afraid to experiment and find the perfect weight that works for your application. Take-up, also known as pre-travel, is the movement of the trigger before you enter the creep phase. It's that slight bit of travel where you feel the trigger starting to move, but no mechanical function is actually taking place. A shorter take-up can help contribute to quicker follow-up shots and control. Creep, on the other hand, is referring to the distance where the hammer and sear are interfacing with each other and moving towards the wall or the break point. This is the spot where triggers that are manufactured well with polished surfaces and good hammer and sear interface geometry will feel very nice, and more budget trigger options may feel gritty or kind of mushy. The break, commonly called the wall or hitting the wall, is the point where the sear of the trigger releases the hammer. A clean break is ideal, meaning the trigger releases without any hesitation. This is the part where the edge of the sear and the hammer are at its final point before the hammer falls. Some triggers will have a crisp and clean break, while others may not give the feeling of a wall at all. A good example of this is the stock trigger on a Glock. After the break, we have over travel. Over travel in triggers refers to the distance that the trigger moves after it breaks until it reaches the end of its travel. Basically, when you pull the trigger, the movement past the break point should be as short as possible, which can help provide faster follow-up shots and consistent pull because your finger simply isn't moving far after the break. Finally, the reset is when your gun fires and you relax your finger off the trigger. The trigger will disconnect from the disconnector and then reset the hammer and sear, ready to fire your next shot. A shorter reset is going to help with those faster follow-up shots, since the shorter reset enables the trigger to be ready to fire quicker, which is important if getting shots downrange is your top priority. Now that we know the basics of trigger terminology, let's take a second and talk about the unique considerations when it comes to 9mm triggers. As it relates to 9mm AR triggers, there have been some problems found. The first problem is most triggers were not designed for the heavier force of the 9mm direct blowback system in mind, which means some parts like the springs could possibly wear out faster and lead to possible malfunctions over time. The second problem is that since the firing pin in the bolt typically has a spring integrated into it, the hammer needs to hit the firing pin with more force compared to your typical AR-15 firing pin to prevent light primer strikes. This means the spring pressure needs to be around 3 pounds at a minimum. To combat these issues, you're going to want to get a 3-pound or greater pull weight trigger, or a trigger that is designed for 9mm, because the heavier tension created by the trigger helps slow down the bolt, reducing the overall wear on the trigger and helps with recoil. Triggers that have a pull weight under 3 pounds use lighter springs and therefore are more likely to lead to light primer strikes when the hammer doesn't hit the firing pin with enough force. Getting a trigger that is designed for 9mm or getting a mil-spec style trigger with heavier springs can help mitigate these issues. If you end up going with a mil-spec style trigger, replacement springs are not expensive and you can change your trigger pull by swapping some springs out. In reality, if you get a modern ramped bolt, like what we talked about in the bolt episode, it shouldn't matter too much what AR style triggers you go with, as long as it's not too light of a pull weight. So now that we have a good understanding of the unique considerations with PCC triggers, we can move on to picking out a trigger that fulfills all of these requirements. We're going to do that in just a minute, but before we do, we should discuss the two big decisions you're going to have to make with any trigger, and that is drop-in versus mil-spec style triggers and two-stage versus single-stage triggers. First up is two-stage versus single-stage, and the proper way to think about the feeling of a single-stage versus a two-stage trigger is by thinking about a carrot and an icicle. When you break an icicle, the break is going to be really sudden and snappy. When you break a carrot, on the other hand, there is going to be a bit of stretch and give before it snaps. Think of the single-stage trigger as the icicle. A single-stage trigger is the simpler of the two. It has a constant pull weight throughout the entire trigger take-up. Once you apply enough pressure, the trigger breaks and releases the hammer. Two-stage triggers, on the other hand, have a distinct break point. The first stage is a lighter pull that allows you to take up the slack in the trigger. Once you reach the second stage, you'll feel a noticeable increase in resistance, usually called, again, the wall, followed by a clean break. For PCCs, you probably want to go single stage for most rain use, unless you plan on using this as a self-defense gun. To be honest, your best bet is to pick a trigger and learn how it functions and become proficient with that before going too deep into the weeds with single or two-stage. But let's move on to the last decision before we go through some trigger options for ourselves. So let me ask, are you really good at installing parts, and do you like a challenge? Or do you want something that is quick and easy to install? That's probably the biggest benefit to drop-in style triggers. One of the biggest decisions you're going to have to make is, do you want a drop-in, also known as a cassette style trigger, or do you want a mil-spec style trigger? Some of the benefits of mil-spec triggers are they can be anywhere from $35 to over $200, making them very accessible for the vast majority of shooters. One of my favorite triggers is our AT3 2-stage 4.5 pound trigger kit, or if you prefer a single stage option, our enhanced nickel Teflon trigger will work great for many AR builders if you're just starting out. If you want the easiest install and use a trigger that is more set it and forget it, you will probably want to grab yourself a drop-in trigger system. Cassette or drop-in triggers are designed for easy installation and come in a single unit that replaces the mil-spec trigger. They're going to be installed as a single unit, which means all you need to do is drop them in, throw in your trigger pins, and that's it. Being that they are pre-assembled, the trigger pull weight, creep, reset, and everything else is preset to make it the best that it can be. Since the manufacturers of these triggers put a ton of advanced engineering and manufacturing, they often come in a higher price tag compared to traditional mil-spec style triggers. If you want to get into one of these triggers that are meant specifically for PCCs, there are some options out there like the Rise Armament Rave PCC trigger, which runs dependably by hitting a spring-loaded firing pin on the bolt with enough force to make sure that your PCC fires reliably every time. The Rave is a popular trigger due to its no-way take-up design to ensure almost no take-up before the crisp 3.5 pound break and fits into most budgets while being designed specifically for 9mm blowback systems. It's a single stage and comes in either flat or bow style triggers, and I also prefer the easy drop-in installation, and the included anti-walk pins is a nice touch. One of the most common questions that we get around here is, does this specific trigger work with my specific gun? Well, it's hard to say. You're probably going to be pretty safe getting a trigger that says it's compatible with AR9s, or for that case, you really are set with any AR-15 trigger kit, but something to consider with any trigger that you're shopping for is always check the compatibility with your gun before you go dropping the dollars. So we've talked a lot about triggers, but what are we going with in ours? For our build, since I want this gun to primarily be a self-defense backpack or truck gun, in those situations, I want to be intentional with all my shots. So with that in mind, I'm gonna go with the Geissele G2S Combat Trigger. This trigger was designed for law enforcement use, close quarters, and mid-range carbine work because it has a two-stage trigger with a first stage pull weight of around 2.5 to 4.5 pounds and a second stage of 2 pounds, meaning your shots are deliberate and precise. So is this the trigger that is going to make you a better shooter, guaranteed? I would argue it's not this trigger. It's not a single stage or a two stage, it's not a mil-spec or a drop-in, and it's not even an adjustable one or ones that the big gun tubers use. The trigger that makes you a better shooter is the one that lets you spend money on ammo so you can go out and train and get better with any trigger that you can afford, whether it's a $35 trigger or a $350 trigger system. Picking your PCC pistol grip, stock, and lower parts can be easy, but do you struggle to know where to start? Don't sweat it, because today we're cutting through the clutter and going through the top things to keep in mind before investing in these crucial parts for your AR9. We'll help you find the best grips for better control, explain how different stocks and braces can change your shooting experience, and give you the key factors to keep in mind when choosing lower parts. Whether you're a seasoned shooter or just starting out, you'll walk away with some valuable insights to enhance your set. So first of all, before we get to our decision-making process, let's do a quick crash course on what each of these components are. First up, the pistol grip. This is your primary point of contact with the gun where your dominant hand holds the gun. A properly fitting grip will enable you to manipulate the controls on your gun, such as the magazine release or the safety selector. Most importantly, a well-fitted grip positions your strong hand to work the trigger consistently. This is probably the part where comfort is going to be the main concern here, so look for textures and angles that fit your hand comfortably. We'll get into angles a little bit later, but if you want to pick one out that feels good for you, go to a local gun store and start feeling up some different grips of the rifles. Does it place your trigger finger in the right spot? Is it too wide? Is it too thin? Is it slippery? Do you like finger grooves in the pistol grip, or would you prefer not to have them? There are a lot of things to consider, but just know grips are not that expensive. They are compatible with almost all other AR platforms and can be replaced in just a few minutes. Next, let's discuss the buttstock. This is one of the things that sets rifles apart from pistols in that the stock enables you to shoulder the rifle, keeping it stable, and it's where you're going to feel the majority of the recoil. Not only that, but it gives your cheek somewhere to rest while you're aiming down range and will give you consistent cheek placement, which makes lining up your shot quicker and easier. A quick thing to keep in mind is the difference between mil-spec and commercial buffer tubes. The main thing you need to know is that mil-spec tubes have a 1.14 inch outer diameter compared to the 1.17 inch outer diameter that commercial buffer tubes have at the stock end. It's a super small difference between the two, but when choosing a buttstock, that is something you're going to want to keep in mind. My main suggestion is just to get a mil-spec buffer tube and a mil-spec stock to match, and you should be good to go. Overall, having a buttstock that doesn't fit you well is not going to make for a good shooting experience and could even to missing some shots if things are uncomfortable for long periods of time. A good buttstock can improve your shooting performance, especially during those long range sessions. At the end of the day, a good stock should be about picking one that helps make target acquisition faster by giving you things like rubberized butt pads with aggressive texturing that provides a secure grip against the body, reducing slippage during rapid target transitions, giving you the feeling of your gun being an extension of your body. If you pick a good one out and set it up right, you should be able to handle and sit behind the gun for hours without getting sore or feeling strained, so find one that works and feels good and stick around because I'm going to give you some ideas for some in a second. Finally, the lower parts. This includes the takedown and pivot pins, safety selector, bolt catches, magazine release, buffer tube, castle nut and end plate, and all the little springs and detents. First things first, depending on the lower you went with, the magazine catch or the bolt catch may not be needed or compatible with your AR9 lower. Now there are a few other things to keep in mind with AR9 lower parts, and we'll cover those later on, so stick around. So when looking at how to prioritize your decision making when it comes down to each of these components, start by breaking it down first and foremost by function, meaning something that works well, fits you and your needs, and won't fall apart. For pistol grips, when it comes to usability, after going around and asking our team of experts around here, what I suggest for most PCC use is somewhere between a 15 and 30 degree angle works best. What we have experienced is a more vertical grip will angle your wrist, making it easier to brace the stock securely against your shoulder while shooting and moving. Now, a pistol grip is one of those things that comes with personalized testing to see what works for you. What works for one person may cause strain and stress on someone else's wrist, so like I said before, go to a store and start feeling up some grips, and that will help you narrow down your choices. Before we cover some stock options, one thing we have to quickly cover is some laws related to stocks. As of the recording of this video, if you have a rifle with a barrel that is under 16 inches in length and you have a buttstock on it, you will need to register it as a short-barreled rifle or an SBR. Now, if you don't want to do that, you can either build a rifle that has a barrel with a minimum length of 16 inches or longer, or you can buy something called a stabilizing pistol brace. These braces were designed for you to attach to your forearm and give you a stable platform for manipulating and shooting a larger pistol like this clearly is, but feel free to use this in whatever style or position that feels most comfortable to you. Just a quick disclaimer, these laws and regulations tend to be fluid, so always stay up to date with your local laws regarding what qualifies as an SBR. So if you want to go through the extra paperwork to register your PCC as an SBR, you can choose a wide array of stocks on the market and get something that works well for you and your budget. There are lots of options like the basic options like an A2 stock or our team favorite here at AT3HQ, the Hogue overmolded collapsible butt stock that has a rubber cheek comb and a rubber polymer hybrid butt pad for a great price and lots of color options. For my friends out there who don't want three-letter agencies in your business, then you can grab a pistol brace like the ones from SB Tactical. These SB braces are definitely the most popular ones out there, and I personally really like the SBA 4X pistol brace, mostly because of the ridged design that feels better than other braces, and a cheek comb that feels better for my kind of handsome cheeks, so this is the one that I'm going to go with for our build. The second consideration when picking out these parts is usability. There are lots of things that will just work well, but does it work well for you, and does it work for what you intend the gun to be used for? If you're going to be operating in the wet jungles, or maybe you just have sweaty hands when you shoot, maybe you want something rubber. If you're in wet conditions, a plastic grip could lead to a bit of a slippery feel, whereas a rubber grip won't be as slippery when things get a little wet. A great example of a rubber grip would be the Hogue overmolded rubber pistol grip, which has a swappable grip that lets you pick from a front strap with or without finger grooves, as well as a back strap with or without a beaver tail, depending on what you want your grip to be like. I like the fact that I can customize this to my liking, so I'm actually going to go with this one for our build. Now, the weight of the stock or brace is another factor. If you want maneuverability and fast transitions, a light stock like the ultra popular 5.8 ounce MFT minimalist stock might be the move for you here. Along with weight savings, you may also want to think about space savings by making your gun more compact. If you want to use this in an indoor setting or stored away in a backpack, you may want to get a smaller stock like the popular Magpul Mo SLM carbine stock. You could also make your gun more compact when being stored away by going with a folding stock adapter like the popular Law Tactical folding adapter or the less expensive Selvin Arms folding stock adapter. Both options will let you fold your buttstock to the side for ultra compact storage. With folding stocks though, you have to be a little bit more careful with compatibility with AR9s depending on what parts you have. For example, folding stocks usually have an adapter that clips into the back of the BCG, but depending on the kind of 9mm bolt you have, you may have a fixed weight that is integrated into the back of the bolt, making it not compatible with this type of folder. As with anything when building an AR, do your homework on the specific products you plan on getting and study up on the compatibility of those parts. The last consideration is looks and what you want your gun to look like. This includes everything from color options to styles. Do you want a matching set of colors that matches the rest of the receiver set, or do you want colors that stand out? Do you want a plain and simple functional A2 grip, or maybe you want things to look a little different for a cool skeletonized build, like the grip from Adaptive Tactical with their LTG that will definitely raise some eyebrows with your range buddies. The same thing goes with the stock. You could go with the basic budget option, but still functional, like the UTG Pro S3 butt stock, or you could get a little wild and look for some of the more, what I call, stylish stock options out there. Hera and Tyrant CNC both come to mind if you're looking to add a little extra flair. As far as lower parts go, honestly, if you want to deep dive into each one of these parts, how they work and how they get installed, then we have a great video for you right here. But what I'll say here is that any standard lower parts kit like ours will do the job just fine in many cases for AR9s. Components like the takedown and pivot pins, the buffer tube assembly, and all the little springs and detents are going to be the same as a typical AR-15 parts kit. But keep an eye out for what your lower receiver already comes with for lower parts, because some are going to come with more specialized parts that work with 9mm, like the mag release on our Angstat lower, for example. Or the bolt catch could be designed for different 9mm bolts and magazines. 9mm magazine geometry has a much different design than the standard AR-15 mags, so keep an eye out for these specialized parts. Once you account for these design changes, there are three big considerations for lower parts. The first of which is if you're a left-handed AR shooter, well, sorry about that, but you should probably consider an ambidextrous safety selector so you can operate it from either side. The second thing to think about with the safety is whether you want a 45-degree safety or a standard 90-degree safety. Some people need to break their grip to get a traditional mil-spec safety to rotate completely. And with a 45-degree safety, they may not need to break their grip at all, getting them into the fight faster. The last consideration is color, because there are many options out there to make your lower parts stand out with different colors. Some people don't like this, but others myself included, think it adds a bit of personality to your wireless LED distribution device, especially in a sea of black-on-black parts everywhere. For us, I'm going to go with our AT3 OD Green color upgrade kits with a foo bag, which is a lost parts kit. This includes all the little springs and detents we're going to need. The ODG color upgrade kit will match our handguard and charging handle nicely, and when you combine the color kit with a foo bag, I get all the little parts I need, plus some extra for when I inevitably shoot some of these springs and detents across the room when I'm building. Next, I'm going to throw a buffer system in, and in order to shoot reliably and minimize recoil as much as possible on an AR9, you're going to have to tune it just right, and to be honest, if you're struggling to pick the right parts, you're in the right spot. I've spent weeks consulting my expert team, digging into the best resources online, and giving things a try out on the range to give you the top recommendations for buffers, springs, and more right here in this video. In today's episode, we'll break down the specific adjustments that can transform the feeling of your PCC's recoil, explain how picking the right buffer and recoil spring can enhance the PCC's reliability and even help reduce recoil, giving you greater control. And finally, we'll give you the formula for the exact weight for your buffer and spring setup to get a fully functional AR9 right away. Hey everyone, it's CJ with AT3 Tactical. So why do the buffer and spring even matter? In simple terms, your buffer and spring have two primary functions. Number one, to absorb the force of the bolt traveling rearward to slow it down. And number two, slide that bolt forward to chamber the next round into battery. These are the components that can impact the feeling of the recoil the most on your AR9, and selecting the right buffer and spring components on your gun can enhance or even perfect its reliability and enjoyability when firing it. If you do it right, swapping your buffer and spring can get you the smoothest and most reliable recoil experience possible. Really, every person and every gun is different when it comes to how they perceive recoil. I might feel recoil differently than my totally yoked buddy who hits the gym 6 times a week and twice on Sundays. But the main challenge for us for the rest of this video here is how we can turn an AR9 that is known for having snappy recoil into a gun that has gentle and smooth recoil while still cycling and operating consistently without any issues. Now, if you're looking for a lot more information than I can give you in this one video about buffers and springs for 9mm ARs, there's a ton of information out there on the interwebs, but I highly recommend checking out Blowback9's website and YouTube channel. He has a ton of information documented, and it's easily one of the best resources if you're looking to make a soft shooting AR9. Let's start out with the buffer. In the context of an AR-15, the buffer is housed, well, in the buffer tube. The primary job of the buffer is to provide mass to help slow things down, which as a side effect changes how the recoil is transferred into your body. Think of it kind of like a shock absorber of the firearm. It helps absorb the compression and rebound as the gun cycles, allowing for quicker follow-up shots and better control. Buffers come in different weights and can change how your gun functions and feels. Now, most of the original buffers that Colt designed for the AR9 had a buffer that looked kinda like this. It was a buffer that was 5.5 ounces and 3 3/4 inches long. However, this kind of buffer is not ideal for us today. The buffer we should use in a 9mm blowback gun is going to be a buffer that was designed to be used in an AR9. The reason why is they will usually be a little bit heavier, anywhere from 6 to 8 ounces, while also being physically larger. Since the 9mm case is shorter than pretty much any centerfire rifle cartridge you shoot, the bolt physically doesn't need to cycle as far back to eject the case through the smaller ejection port or to pick up the next round out of the magazine. Now, if you want to use a normal AR-15 buffer, you can use spacer weights behind the buffer in the buffer tube, or even the old trick of stacking a few quarters in the back of the buffer tube to make up for that extra travel. Keep in mind that the weight of a standard AR-15 buffer is probably going to be too light for an AR-9, as most AR-9s are still going to benefit from a heavier buffer. Going with a lighter buffer for an AR-9 typically increases the cycling speed, which could be useful, but may lead to more felt recoil because a lighter buffer has less mass to slow down the bolt, allowing that energy to be transferred into the shooter. Now, on the other hand, using a heavier buffer slows down the cycling process, which can again help reduce felt recoil, but going too heavy may make the gun feel sluggish or struggle to function correctly. The key here is finding the right balance for your AR9 build and your ammunition choice. If you do use a traditional AR-15 buffer in the 9mm AR without some type of spacer, you may experience overtravel, which means the bolt carrier is further rearward than is needed while cycling. This can cause problems like damaging the bolt, allowing spent casings to fall into the trigger area, which is a real pain by the way, and it can also put too much stress on the buffer tube, which could lead to cracking and, in a worst case scenario, the buffer tube blowing out the back. Ideally, the bolt should only travel back enough to either engage the bolt catch or to pick up a fresh round out of the magazine. A lot of 9mm buffers will usually have reciprocating weights as well. These sliding weights create a delayed energy transfer, softening the impact of the bolt carrier group against the buffer. This is called a dead blow effect, and those weights can move around in the buffer, and this will help counteract any bouncing that will happen as the bolt comes to a rest. The sliding weights in the buffer will also spread out that energy transfer over a longer time frame, which helps minimize peak forces during cycling, which is super important in a blowback operated AR9. A lot of felt recoil reduction is going to be gained by slowing things down. Instead of a quick hard punch, we can turn that recoil into a firm push. If you want to fine-tune your recoil even more, you can get things like adjustable buffers. Adjustable buffers often come with multiple weights, typically made from aluminum, steel, or tungsten, that you can add or remove to adjust the total weight. When using an adjustable buffer, you'll want to go to the range and experiment to find the right weight that allows for reliable cycling, proper ejection patterns, and mitigate recoil, but we'll get into what to look for at the range in just a little bit. One of the most popular brands for adjustable buffers is the Odinworks AR9 adjustable buffer. Using an adjustable buffer can help you tune your AR9 for different loads, or if you're super cool and you're using a suppressor, which can also affect how your gun cycles. Okay, so don't miss this, because here is the magic formula for most AR9 buffer weights. It is recommended to have a bolt and a buffer combined weight of at least 22 to 24 ounces or more. 9mm buffers are usually going to be heavier because most modern bolts do not weigh the full 16 ounces intended for the older Colt style buffer. To account for variance in bolt weights and to have a reliable AR9, we find that this weight range to be a good starting point depending on your variables like ammo and other environmental factors. But a starting point of 22 to 24 ounces is a great place to start. The bottom line is there's a lot of buffer options depending on your bolt, spring, and ammo and weight of your gun, which makes it kind of impossible to really tell you which buffer is best for you. To get an even smoother experience, you can build out the Blowback 9 trademarked Gentle Recoil system. This system is a little complicated to put together, so we aren't going to spend a bunch of time here to talk about it, but if you want to take a look into how to build out this system, links are in the description. Okay, next is the spring, and I may get some die-hard PCC fans mad at me in the comments for saying this, but a standard carbine spring, like this one here at AT3, is all that you need in a 9mm AR. Many AR9 enthusiasts say using heavier springs like 308 springs is a good idea to help reliable feeding and cycling of the system. However, you should not be using 308 springs, rifle length springs, or any other type of springs. Using these can cause problems over the life of your gun because you will be bottoming out the spring in the buffer tube, and that can cause some serious problems for yourself or even worse, your firearm. You might also run into the problem of overspringing the system. Overspringing an AR9 can lead to a lot more issues other than just having too light of a spring. It can lead to frequent jams, misfeeds because the bolt does not travel far back enough, or it travels too far forward too quickly. It can also cause issues stripping a round out of the magazine and feeding it into the barrel. Likewise, you may also experience a lot more bolt bounce along with just beating up the components in your gun, leading to a shorter lifespan. If you're looking for flexibility with tuning your AR9, you could opt to go for a lighter bolt and a stronger spring. Many experienced 9mm shooters find using a lighter bolt and a tighter spring gives them more control in the tuning process. I would not recommend this for most normal 9mm shooters, however, but there are some people that like to have a little bit of extra flexibility and have no problems putting in the time to tune the system just right. The main problem when using normal carbine springs then is that they can be a little noisy after firing, since you will hear the spring twang around a bit in the buffer tube. If you want something a little bit quieter, you can use something like a flat wire spring to help reduce the sound because they'll be tighter, therefore coming to a stop more quickly in the buffer tube and reducing noise. Phew. Okay, now that we have learned a lot about what things you need to keep in mind when picking out a buffer and spring, let's talk about what you should be paying attention to in order to make sure that this thing works. When you take out your new AR9 to the range for the first time, there are a few factors you're going to want to be looking for when testing out your new buffer system. Focus on whether your gun just shoots in the first place, and there aren't any major issues like failures to feed or failures to fire or eject or anything. If your gun cycles consistently without any malfunctions, you're in the right track. Next, pay attention to felt recoil. If you picked out the right parts, you should have soft and easy recoil control. If your AR9 feels snappy or hard to control, that might be a good indication you need to swap your buffer or spring for something different. If it does feel pleasant to shoot, you can move on to the next thing to look for, the ejection pattern. Ideally, spent casings should eject at roughly 3 to 5 o'clock position, and they should land about 6 feet away. The ejection pattern suggests that the bolt is moving at the right speed with the right amount of force from the tension of the spring and the weight of the buffer. Ejection patterns that are too far forward or backward can indicate that you have a buffer that is too light or too heavy. A buffer that is too light may cause erratic ejection, while one that is too heavy might result in weak ejection, so pay attention to where those little casings are going. If the ejection is too weak or inconsistent, it could also mean an issue with the recoil spring, such as it being too strong or too weak for your setup. That's why, again, using a standard carbine spring helps reduce variables here. Lastly, after a few hundred rounds, check for wear on components like the bolt catch if you have one. This can indicate a buffer or a spring problem if the bolt slams that bolt catch too hard. If you see wear on components, some experimentation may be necessary to find the optimal setup for your specific build. Now that you have things dialed in just right, there are other options outside of the traditional buffer and spring setup that are called captured spring systems. With these gentle recoil springs, there are two big advantages. Number one is noise mitigation, since the spring and buffer weights are all integrated. But let's get more specific and let's talk about an upgrade that's been getting a lot of buzz in the AR9 community, the JP Silent Captured Spring, SCS, and the Armaspec Stealth Recoil Spring, or SRS. One of the best things about the captured spring options is that they are a drop-in replacement. No gunsmithing is required here, so just take out your existing buffer and spring and slide it down into the buffer tube and you're ready to roll. For the SCS or the SRS to be compatible with 9mm builds, you have to be running a proper bolt. For proper function in 9mm rifles or pistols, the extra weight held in on the back of the bolt carrier with a roll pin needs to be removed. Certain bolts, like the Air Precision bolt, may not be compatible due to their specific design, so look carefully at product listings and bolts to see if it's compatible. You can definitely get into the nitty-gritty of using lighter bolts, heavier springs, and captured springs to tune your gun just right, but just be aware that usually tuning your buffer and spring combination requires testing different buffer weights and spring weights, which can take a bit of time and may not also be the nicest on your wallet. That is where an adjustable buffer like the Odinworks is nice. Yes, it costs a lot more than a traditional run-of-the-mill buffer, but you can change out the weights to help tune your PCC without having to buy multiple buffers. Just remember, when tuning any firearm, reliability should always be the top priority. So as usual, there's a lot of options out there, but what are we going to go with in our build? For our build, I'm going to go with the Armaspec Stealth Recoil Spring. Going with this gets us a smooth and quiet recoil system that's easier to work with and should get us pretty decent recoil reduction compared to a traditional buffer and spring setup. Even though other buffer and spring options might give me smoother recoil, I can get most of the way there by going with a setup like this, so that's what we'll do here. So there's a few things to remember from this video, so here's a quick summary of things to remember when picking out a buffer and spring system. The buffer and bolt should weigh together 22 ounces or more, and your buffer ideally should be about 4 inches long and have sliding or reciprocating weights inside. You do not have to use any special type of spring. A normal carbine spring is all that is needed for proper 9mm blowback systems. If you're looking to take your PCC to the next level, then you have to put some time and thought into the accessories. You have to start out with a way to see downrange with either an optic or some sights, but what about after that? How about a sling, a weapon light, foregrips? We're going to go into all of that and talk about these options and how to pick out the right ones that will work for your PCC. So let's get into it. So first of all, picking out the right accessories for your AR starts with asking yourself, what do you want your gun to be used for? Now, if you've been with us through this entire series, hopefully that's not the first time you're asking yourself this question, but it's probably the most important thing when you go to pick out your accessories. It's all about using the right tool for the right job. Probably the most important accessory you'll need is an optic or sights. Honestly, most ranges won't even let you shoot a weapon without proper sights, so let's take care of those first. Again, choosing the right sights or optics depends on your intended use, and it's crucial to train with that optic constantly. This will help you create index points to help you acquire your target quicker and make your shooting experience more comfortable and consistent. For a lot of people, iron sights work just fine if you're just starting out, and you can find some good budget options for iron sights. If you're on a budget, getting a good pair of backup iron sights can help keep some money in your wallet. Probably the most common backup sights option is the Magpul Gen 2 backup sights. Once you get a good set of irons, down the line you can hop into a red dot or scope, but being proficient with irons is darn near a must for anyone operating an AR or any gun for that matter. Most people with 9mm ARs upgrade to a red dot optic because red dots excel at helping you acquire your target faster. They'll also make it a lot easier on your eyes. What I mean here is with traditional iron sights, you need to choose if you want to be target focused or front sight focused. With a red dot, everything becomes target focused, making life much easier. Importantly, they are effective in low light conditions. When it's dark and you hear a bump in the night, a red dot allows you to see your point of aim. In a dark scenario, I would want to see where I'm aiming, and if I'm just rocking irons, the front sight post could be hard to see properly unless you have night sights. So, a nice, clean, bright red dot can help with that. Now, the downside of red dots in low light conditions is that if your dot doesn't have an auto brightness feature, you may need to adjust it down for lower light conditions, or the dot may be way too bright and actually affect how your eyes see in the dark. Okay, now that I've convinced you of getting a red dot, you have to narrow down your choices because, man, there's a lot out there for red dots. The first big question is, do you want an open or enclosed red dot? So what's the difference? Well, an open reflex optic will have its emitter open to the elements. Now, most open emitter red dots are going to be water resistant or even waterproof, but things like dirt, lint, sand, or other material can start to build up and block out the emitter from projecting the dot into the glass window of your optic. Open reflex sights have some advantages, like being smaller and lighter. If weight savings or having a compact setup is a requirement for your build, then I would look into an open red dot. The nice thing here is a lot of open red dot emitters come in a bunch of different sizes and footprints. As for options, there are a lot of them out there, like your favorites here at AT3, wink wink, with the AT3 Aero red dot. That is a great bang for the buck. Suppose you're set on rocking one of these on your PCC. In that case, I'll definitely encourage you to get a 0.83-inch riser mount with it. Due to the design of ARs and the buttstock not having any drop like you see with a lot of shotguns and other styles of rifles, mounting any red dot directly to the top rail will require you to crane your neck, which will make it very uncomfortable to see through the optic. So whatever red dot you get, make sure to get a compatible riser mount with it. Moving on to closed red dots, or closed emitters, commonly referred to as mailboxes. They're going to have a lot of the same principles as open emitter optics, but there are some reasons why lots of people grab these guys off the shelves, especially for larger platform handguns and rifles. They're going to be more rugged and durable since that red dot emitter is enclosed in a sealed and protected housing. If you're going to be in a wet environment a lot, playing in the dirt or sand, or just generally going to abuse your weapon a bit more than the average person, you'll probably want to go with an enclosed option since it's going to be better protecting that housing and you won't need to worry about dirt or other foreign material getting into the emitter. Now, some drawbacks of closed emitter optics are that the housing is going to be a little bit thicker, but also there are going to be more panes of glass. This means that it will generally have a slightly larger form factor compared to the smaller red dots, but they're also going to be slightly heavier. The other benefit of enclosed red dots is that they're going to be sealed to keep moisture out, which will help reduce fogging. As far as what to look for, you should ask yourself a few simple questions to help narrow down your decision. The first of those questions is, how big do you want your actual dot to be? For precision shooting, you probably want to stick with a smaller dot around 3 MOA or so. Now, if you're going to be running your trigger finger as fast as you possibly can, then you probably want to go up to something like a 4 to a 6 MOA area. Now, there are dots that emit a death donut, or usually a ring around 60 MOA around a smaller dot. Many shooters are going towards the death donut for self-defense because it can help acquire your target a little bit quicker than just a single dot. There are also options out there for what color you want your dot to be. Lots of people have a hard time seeing a straight red dot, and other people think it's easier to see a green dot. Now, if you are going to be in a leafy green area with lots of green trees, you'll probably want to go with a red dot, but technically, green is easier for the human eye to see. So as far as what I'm picking out, I'm gonna go with our AT3 Alpha Green Dot. I find that green is more pleasant to my eye, and even though you can't see the green dot unless you're the shooter, it goes well with the green theme I got going on here for our build, so that's what we're gonna do. Okay, we got our optic all figured out. Now let's check out a sling. With a sling, you can transition from a firing position to hands-free carry in split seconds. This means that you can navigate obstacles, switch to a handgun, or even grab a snack without having to drop your rig, ensuring it's always within reach. Once again, there are a lot of options for slings, from single to dual point mounting options, to color choices, and even padding and feel. The biggest thing you want to consider is how you want to mount your sling to your gun. Now, there are lots of options out there, from the old school loop system, the paraclip method, but I'm betting most of you are going to want to go with some type of QD system for your sling. QD stands for quick detach, and if you've never used them, they're a game changer for slinging your rifle. QD slings have these little locking swivels that you attach to your rifle, and they make it super easy to snap your sling into your rifle. Plus, if you're on a budget, QDs make it easy to swap your sling from one weapon to another, but my advice is to get a dedicated sling for each rifle. Next, you want to put some time and thought into where you want to mount your sling to your gun. Basically, this comes down to single point or 2-point mounting. Single point mounting is attaching the sling to a single point on your rifle, usually around the back of the receiver with a QD end plate. Many shooters feel like this gives them a lot of mobility and makes it easy to transition between shooting positions. 2-point mounting, on the other hand, involves attaching the sling to 2 points on your rifle, like the handguard, buttstock, or brace. Now, 2-point mounting will probably be more stable on your body, but I wouldn't necessarily call one method more secure than the other. Really, the best option for you will depend on your personal preference and how you plan to use your AR9. In most cases, pick one that feels best and go train with that. So for our build, I'm going to make sure I have QD points on 3 places. One on the rear of the handguard, one on the end plate, and then another on the brace. This gives me the flexibility to switch from single point to dual mounting points. For our slings, if we look at the most popular options, there's no question that Magpul is by far the most popular. And probably the reason why is because they have options that will work for almost any sling carry style. If anyone asked me which sling I should go with, I would almost always say the MS4 sling by Magpul. The MS4 sling has two QD swivels that can quickly switch between one-point and single-point configurations, so no matter how you're going to be slinging your weapon, the MS4 can adapt to you. Okay, we have our optic, our sling. Next, let's move on to lights. Weapon-mounted lights are almost a necessity on any self-defense weapons, especially if there's any chance you may be working in low lights conditions. Now, if you're building a PCC for competition or general range fun, you probably won't need a light because you're just going to be using it on the range in the daylight anyway. Now, weapon lights can get really complicated with all the different specs and different ways to measure light output, so in this video, we aren't going to be going super in-depth with the nitty-gritty of candelas or spill patterns and all that. All we're going to do here is guiding you towards the right light for your AR9 setup. If you want a complete breakdown of weapon lights and all the features and things to consider, then let us know in the comments below and we'll get started on that. So if you start Googling weapon lights for ARs, you might look around at all the options and it can be really overwhelming. But choosing the right weapon light does not need to be overwhelming. It sounds like I'm beating a dead horse here, but again, consider your primary use of your gun. Are you focused on home defense or long-range outdoor scenarios? This will guide your beam pattern and the brightness needs that you might have. For us, we intend to use this gun as more of a home defense and a short-range training gun for daytime use. Now let's talk about lumens and candela. Lumens measures the total output of light. More lumens will usually mean more overall light. Candela is used to measure the intensity of the light in a specific direction. Think of it like getting sprayed with a garden hose. If your total flow of the hose is lumens, then the pressure is the candela. You can adjust the output of the hose by making the stream wider or narrower. As the stream gets narrower, the pressure you would feel would get more intense. Just like a hose, a higher candela creates a narrower, more focused beam that reaches further distances. So the basic rule of thumb here is pretty simple. If you plan on using your gun outside at night, you probably want to get something 1,000 lumens or over. Something that's 1,000 lumen plus range can help illuminate targets at much longer distances. Next, for picking out a weapon light, you need to figure out what mounting system you want to go with, M-LOK or Picatinny. Most handguards these days incorporate M-LOK slots for mounting accessories like lights, but if you're rocking a quad rail or want to mount the light on the top of the handguard, you'll more than likely want to go with a pick rail option. There are a lot of options out there on the market for both mounting styles. On our gun, we have pick rails on the top of our Stinger handguard and on the bottom. We also have M-LOK slots on the sides and on the bottom. And since we'll probably mount our light on the right side, I'll have to keep an eye on making sure I get a light that can mount on M-LOK. The light that we're choosing for our build is the Streamlight ProTac 1L. We're going with this light since it has a nice brightness of about 350 lumens, which may not sound like a lot, but since we plan on using this gun as a close quarters self-defense gun, this brightness will be just fine, and it also comes with a pressure pad and M-LOK attachments. Now, to have a good time at the range, you need some magazines, and with Glock-compatible PCC, you'll have all kinds of options, but what I would suggest is to get as large of a magazine as you can. Now, if you're one of the lucky people who live in a state with magazine restrictions, you're going to have to follow those laws. Some applications for smaller magazines are beneficial though. Weight savings and compactness come into mind here, but nothing beats sending 30 Freedom seeds downrange. Since 9mm ARs can be a little finicky, ensuring you have a good, reliable magazine for troubleshooting is a must. If you want even more capacity with your existing Glock mags, you could get a Glock mag extension like the ones from Tyrant CNC, Strike, or any of the other few dozen brands that produce magazine extensions. One of my good friends here at the team has these Taylor Freelance magazine extensions for about 7 years, and they're still going strong. Outside of that, you're still going to have all the AR accessories that you're used to seeing on an AR-15, like hand stops, foregrips, and rail covers. Lots of people who use these guns with shorter barrels like to have a hand stop to keep a hand from sliding too far forward and touching the hot barrel, or even worse, the suppressor, and getting your hand in front of the muzzle. Now there's one thing we need to cover when we talk about foregrips. If you're rocking a pistol brace, a vertical foregrips are not an option unless you want to turn it into an SBR. A lot of manufacturers of foregrips are making slightly angled grips to keep them from being called vertical. If you're rocking a barrel under 16 inches with a pistol brace, then you want to get a foregrip that has some type of angle to keep our favorite three-lettered agencies off your back. In the end, these parts are all about function and style. Just remember that foregrips are usually inexpensive and, in the grand scheme of things, easy to change, and you don't really need to affect the use of your gun by picking a different one. So feel free to see what's out there and find some accessories that you like and that fit your budget. Hopefully by now we've given you some ideas on the best accessories to use on your PCC and inspired you enough in this series to build out your own AR9. But if you're wondering why you should be using 9mm ARs in the first place, then you can go back to the first episode here, where we talk all about the unique benefits of this platform